Practical Ethics by Peter Singer was written amidst the cultural and social landscape of the late 1970s. This period was marked by expanding social movements, increased awareness of civil rights, environmental concerns, and the rising discourse around animal welfare. Chapter 3 of the said book explores the ethical treatment of animals and remains one of the most important chapters of the book. The chapter begins by looking into the past instances of discrimination and injustice. Singer wants to remind readers that racism and sexism have been proven to be morally wrong, and efforts have been made to address social inequalities among humans. He also points out that not all humans are equal in terms of their abilities. Some are more intelligent, compassionate, moral, or communicative. Nevertheless, society generally believes that all humans, regardless of their abilities, should receive equal consideration in meeting their needs and interests. However, these standards of equality have not been extended to animals, and Singer believes this to be unjust. He questions the widely held belief that humans are superior to animals and can use them without considering their pain and suffering. He refers to this mindset as speciesism, comparing it to racism or sexism. Singer asserts that speciesism is a prejudiced attitude that lacks moral justification, resulting in the exploitation and mistreatment of countless animals. He argues that if a creature is capable of experiencing suffering, it is morally unjustifiable to ignore that fact. He therefore refers to anyone who fails to acknowledge the rights of animals as speciesist. To establish a basis for considering social inequalities, he quotes Jeremy Bentham, who suggests that the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer. Bentham emphasizes that a being's ability to suffer is a necessary quality that warrants equal respect. It is essential to acknowledge and consider the suffering of beings in any moral decision-making process. Arguing that a stone has interest would be absurd, since it is emotionless and cannot feel the effects of anything that is done to it. When treated in this manner, the mice will suffer, therefore a mouse does have an interest in not being tormented. If an entity is capable of suffering, it is morally unjustifiable to disregard or dismiss that suffering. This forms the entire foundation of the argument for extending the principle of equality to non-human animals. However, there may be uncertainties about how this equality should be practiced in real-life situations. Some may argue that the pain felt by a mouse cannot be compared to the pain felt by a human. Humans possess a higher level of awareness, making their suffering more intense. They might argue that the suffering of a person slowly dying from cancer cannot be equated to the suffering of a laboratory mouse facing the same fate. Singer acknowledges that the human cancer patient usually suffers more than the non-human cancer patient, but this does not undermine the notion of considering the interests of all beings equally. There may be instances where a member of one species suffer more than a member of another species. In such cases, we should still apply the principle of equal consideration of interests, but prioritize relieving the greater suffering. To illustrate this, consider a simpler situation. If you were to give a horse a forceful slap on its rump with an open hand, the horse may startle, but it would likely feel minimal pain due to the thickness of its skin. However, if you were to slap a baby in the same manner, the baby would cry and feel pain as its skin is more sensitive. Therefore, slapping a baby would be worse than slapping a horse, assuming equal force. However, there might be a specific type of blow, perhaps with a heavy stick, that would cause the horse the same amount of pain as the simple slap causes the baby. That is what I mean by the same amount of pain. If it is considered wrong to inflict that level of pain on a baby for no good reason, then unless we are speciesists, it is equally wrong to inflict the same amount of pain on a horse for no good reason. If we were to ensure that animals do not suffer unless the well-being of humans is significantly impacted, we would have to make extensive and transformative modifications in how we treat animals. This would include altering the food we eat, the farming methods we use, experimental procedures in many fields of science, our approach to wildlife and to hunting, trapping and the wearing of furs, and areas of entertainment like circuses, rodeos, and zoos. Consequently, this would lead to a substantial decrease in the overall amount of suffering we inflict. Singer insists that most humans are speciesist, as evidenced by their consumption of animal meat. He claims that although there are alternative options available for human consumption that are healthy and rich in protein, humans choose to satisfy their own tastes at the expense of the animal world. He will encourage adopting a vegan diet. He supported this by enumerating several disadvantages in animal consumption. Animals raised in production farms have been fattened on grains and other foods that only about 1/10 of the nutritional value remains as meat for human consumption. The livestock industry also contributes more to global warming than the entire transport sector. Furthermore, he argues that our desire to consume animal meat leads to the inhumane practices of breeding and killing animals solely for consumption. Brutal factory farm methods are not only limited to breeding and killing animals. It also includes castration, the separation of mother and young, the breaking up of herds, branding, transporting, and slaughterhouse handling. Supporting and encouraging the production of animal products by purchasing them perpetuates a cruel system. The question now is not whether animal products should be produced without suffering. The area where speciesism is most evident is in the use of animals for experiments. Some individuals believe that all animal experiments serve important medical purposes and can be justified based on the belief that they alleviate more suffering than they cause. However, this assumption is incorrect. The LD50 test, created in the 1920s to determine the lethal dose that will cause 50% of a sample of animals to die, is still used today for certain purposes. For example, it is used to test the popular anti-wrinkle treatment, Botox or cosmetic. These tests are not necessary to prevent human suffering, and even if there were no alternative to using animals for testing the safety of products, it would be preferable to forego these tests and accept wrinkles, as most older individuals have done throughout history. Singer argues that if experimenters are not willing to use a human infant in their studies, their eagerness to use animals is simply discrimination. This is because adult apes, cats, mice, and other mammals are more aware of what is happening to them, more self-directed, and as far as we can tell, equally sensitive to pain as any human infant. In the last section of his essay, Peter Singer addressed various objections concerning the case for equal consideration for the interests of animals. He began by reinforcing the fact that animals feel pain just as humans do. This is in response to his earlier argument wherein he emphasized that the capacity for suffering is what entitles a being to equal consideration. Singer explained that although animals cannot communicate in our language, their behavior when in pain mirrors human responses, justifying their ability to experience pain or suffering. On this basis, he pointed out that an animal's capacity to express pain is akin to an infant who lacks communication skills yet whose pain is recognized. Additionally, he highlighted the likelihood that animals share similar feelings with humans, given that the nervous systems of all vertebrates evolved from common ancestors. Despite this evidence, others believe that an animal's instinct to prey on other animals exposes them to similar predation from humans. Referring to Darwinian survival of the fittest, we are only playing our part in the natural law by eating animals. Peter Singer believes animals are incapable of reflecting on the ethics of their diet. Therefore, it is incorrect to judge them for their predatory instincts and say they deserve to be treated in a similar way. However, we as humans can make a conscious decision to refrain from animal consumption and to reject intensive farming. In the subject of ethics, Peter Singer addresses some objections regarding an animal's inability to reciprocate. Others argue that since an animal can neither appreciate nor reciprocate a human's restraint from consuming them, there is no reason to avoid it altogether. For instance, refraining from hunting a lion doesn't guarantee immunity from being preyed upon by a lion. Similarly, in a shark attack, it is likely you'll still be eaten regardless of your respect for the interest of animals. Since animals cannot reciprocate, they are outside the limits of the ethical contract. This perspective holds that because animals cannot reciprocate ethical considerations, ethics doesn't extend to them. Based on this premise, Peter Singer concluded that animals, intellectually disabled humans, and infants are alike, given that all lack the capacity for reciprocity, in which case, contractual accounts of ethics are inconsistent and unreliable. This unreliability is also evident in the sustainability movement and the question on how caring for posterity could benefit us in any way. Singer expanded on this, asserting that ethical perspectives shouldn't be solely driven by self-interest. Instead, our moral responsibilities should encompass those incapable of reciprocation. The primary objection raised pertains to the stark difference between humans and animals. Some argue that self-awareness grants a being priority over others, and as animals lack reasoning or self-awareness, they receive lesser consideration than humans. Peter Singer once again refuted it by comparing animals to intellectually disabled humans, suggesting that they might possess less self-awareness and autonomy than some animals. However, unlike animals, intellectually disabled humans are not subjected to painful experiments or bred for culinary purposes. Now, some philosophers cannot accept the claim in which intellectually disabled humans are to be treated like animals, so they resorted to defending speciesism instead. According to them, once we view anyone from our own species to be deserving of a treatment that is intended for animals, we go down a slippery slope in which every member of our species, intellectually disabled or not, can be treated like animals. To avoid going down the slippery slope, a clear line must be drawn between the distinction of humans and animals. As discussed earlier, self-awareness and autonomy cannot be that dividing line, since animals and intellectually disabled humans both display the same characteristics. Instead, the dividing line is now distinguished by species. They argued that although intellectually disabled humans may not possess higher capacities than any other animals, they are nonetheless a member of our species, and for that reason, we have obligations to treat them better than those who are not us. Peter Singer clarified that his argument for the equality for the interests of animals is not to lower the status of any humans, but to elevate the status of animals. It is unreasonable to alter the way we treat animals on the grounds that we might start treating intellectually disabled humans with the same lack of concern we have. A philosopher, Bernard Williams, defended speciesism by asking which side will be on if a higher alien species decided it is the best decision to eradicate our species. No matter how well informed that decision is, we would obviously side with our own species against them. Singer argued that it is not a matter of which species to side with, but doing what is right and necessary.